Hollywood's spotlight has never been kind to everyone. It shines brilliantly on the chosen faces, then turns cold and merciless on those it no longer needs. And in that glittering world, there was once a name expected to become the next great icon of action cinema: Michael Biehn. The 1980s, an era ruled by muscle-bound heroes, blinding lights, and explosions, meant to symbolize unstoppable strength. Yet among Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, and Van Damme, there was one man who stepped onto the screen in a completely different way. Not with brute force, but with eyes that carried an entire universe of hurt. And when he said, "Come with me if you want to live," audiences believed a new legend had just been born. But behind that immortal moment, another story was taking shape. A story Hollywood never told. A truth fans never had the chance to hear. Why did a talent like Michael Biehn disappear from major films? Was it because Hollywood quietly closed its doors on him? Or because a storm was silently rising from deep within the man himself? Today, we open that door. Before becoming one of the sci-fi icons of the 1980s, Michael Biehn was simply a boy from Anniston, Alabama, a small town with no Hollywood dreams to cling to. Born on July 31, 1956, Michael grew up in a disciplined middle-class family where affection was rarely expressed and emotions were treated as a luxury. In that environment, young Michael learned silence early. A silence not just to listen, but to survive. When the family moved to Arizona, Michael entered his teenage years with a withdrawn, introverted nature, always standing on the fringes of the crowd. He played basketball well enough, but what people noticed wasn't his athletic ability. It was his eyes, always seeming to chase something distant, private, and nearly unreachable. Those years quietly shaped the foundation of the man he would become. A soul far more sensitive than his tough exterior suggested, a constant, simmering need for recognition, and an inner world so deep he didn't know how to express it. Those suppressed emotions gradually turned into an obsession, a need to prove his worth, to be seen in some way. And the invisible wounds left from childhood would later become the very elements that gave his performances such rare, aching depth. No one knew that even as a child, life had quietly placed two things inside Michael Biehn, both gifts and curses: a heart that felt more intensely than others, and a mind far more fragile than anyone realized. Michael Biehn was not the kind of person who grew up knowing he would one day become an actor. His youth wasn't tied to stage lights or glamorous dreams. Instead, he stepped into adulthood with a profound emptiness, a vague but persistent feeling that the ordinary paths of life were not meant for him. Something inside him kept whispering, "I have to find a place where I truly belong." Then he found the stage, completely by chance, almost as if fate had intervened. The first time he stood in a drama class, Michael realized something he wouldn't dare admit until years later. Acting allowed him to express emotions his childhood never permitted him to show. Everything he had suppressed, the anxieties he couldn't name, the quiet wounds buried deep, suddenly found a way out under the stage lights. He moved to the University of Arizona to study drama. There, Michael was not the most gifted student, but he was the most obsessed. He observed everything: the way a person breathes when they're afraid, the way eyes change when hope slips away, the way a psychological wound can choke someone's voice. His teachers noticed something rare: Michael didn't act to succeed. He acted to survive. But when he arrived in Los Angeles, everything changed. Hollywood was colder than he imagined. Audition after audition, small role after small role, sometimes appearing on screen for just a few seconds before disappearing. And each rejection pulled him back into that familiar childhood echo. I'm not good enough. Yet it was precisely those failures that sharpened what made Michael unique. A layered inner world, a vulnerable strength, and a gaze capable of saying more than 1,000 lines of dialogue. Then came the defining moment. A young director named James Cameron was searching for someone who could be strong yet wounded, trustworthy yet anxious, someone who could fight the future while being haunted by the past. Michael walked into that audition, not knowing that his entire life was about to change. Forever. Opportunity came to Michael Biehn at a moment when no one, not even he himself, could have imagined it would change the history of cinema. That film was The Terminator, 1984, and the role was Kyle Reese, a soldier sent from the future, carrying pain, fear, and a desperate, unwavering love for Sarah Connor. In an era dominated by muscle-bound action heroes, Michael appeared like a paradox. He wasn't Schwarzenegger, he wasn't Stallone, he wasn't Van Damme, he wasn't the invincible hero. He was the breakable hero, and that changed everything. Kyle Reese became iconic, not because of action scenes, but because of the eyes that always seemed to be fighting an invisible wound buried deep inside the mind. James Cameron once said that what made him choose Michael was not his strength, but the pain behind his eyes. And Michael brought that real pain into Kyle Reese, the pain of a boy who grew up in silence, always trying to prove he was good enough. After The Terminator, Cameron immediately recognized something Hollywood rarely saw: an actor who could combine vulnerability and resolve into one compelling force. So just 2 years later, he cast Michael again in Aliens, 1986, this time as Corporal Hicks, a role Michael received at the very last minute. But it was that urgency that helped create a legend. Hicks wasn't a loud hero. He was the one who stayed steady amid chaos, holding on to the faintest shred of hope for the entire team. Michael crafted a different kind of action hero, a man who was calm, afraid, yet still willing to protect others even as that fear ate away at him. Fans loved Hicks not because he was strong, but because he was human. Then came The Abyss, 1989, where Cameron challenged Michael in the exact opposite direction. A character crushed by paranoia and psychological breakdown. It was the hardest role of his career, not because of action, but because it forced Michael to confront the darkest corners of himself. And he did, delivering one of the most powerful psychological performances of his life. These 3 films, The Terminator, Aliens, The Abyss, reveal exactly how Michael Biehn's aura was created. Not through brawn, not through explosions, but through the emotional weight he carried into every character. He proved that in the harshest sci-fi worlds, what audiences remember most are not the blasts and bullets, but the silences. And within those silences, Michael Biehn's legacy was born. The success of the 1980s should have launched Michael Biehn into the ranks of Hollywood's A-list. Yet, ironically, just when the lights shone brightest, the deepest cracks began to appear. Behind the image of the brave, unshakable hero, Michael carried a far more fragile soul than anyone realized. And Hollywood, a place where shining never comes with safety, quickly touched that vulnerability. Michael was the kind of actor who felt more than an action star was ever supposed to feel. The more famous he became, the more he was forced into the mold of the muscle-bound hero. Strong, steady, unbreakable. But inside, he was a man who lived through emotion. Easily wounded, constantly wrestling with the fear of, "Am I good enough?" That conflict began to suffocate him. Alcohol appeared first as a way to soothe his anxiety after long shooting days. Just a little to relax. Then a little more to sleep. Then more still to numb the strain of maintaining the facade of a fearless hero. But the deeper the pain grew, the more alcohol became the only lifeline Michael clung to. And from there, it began to control him. The childhood wounds he had never healed, the fear of being judged, the pressure to constantly prove himself, blended with the need to uphold a heroic image, making Michael increasingly reactive on set. Not because he was mean-spirited, but because he didn't know how to navigate the chaos inside him. Hollywood noticed that instability quickly. Producers became cautious. Directors worried about delays. Rumors spread. Michael Biehn was unpredictable, difficult to work with. And in an industry that worships stability, such rumors were nothing short of a sentence. His personal life fared no better. Marriages fell apart. Relationships slipped through his fingers. Not because he didn't love, but because he loved too much, too intensely, too insecurely. A mind battling itself finds it nearly impossible to maintain a home. And loneliness, that old companion from his youth, returned to swallow him whole, piece by piece. But Michael's greatest tragedy wasn't alcohol. It wasn't his temper. It was that he had never been taught how to face pain. He only knew how to turn it into performance. But when the lights went out, and there was no character left to hide behind, that pain came crashing directly into him. The storm inside him grew larger with each passing year. And that very storm was about to pull Michael into the darkest chapter of his life. The collapse, and Hollywood quietly closing its doors. Michael Biehn's downfall didn't happen because of a loud scandal. It wasn't a dramatic crash that sent the tabloids into a frenzy. Instead, it felt like a door slowly closing. No sound, no warning. And by the time Michael realized it, everything was already too late. Hollywood had once seen him as a raw gem full of emotional depth. But after the signs of instability on set, that image began to crack. No one wanted to gamble on an actor whose emotional state fluctuated, especially on films with budgets in the tens of millions. A few days of delays could cost a production hundreds of thousands of dollars. And Michael, with his shifting sensitivity, gradually became a production risk. Ironically, the very emotional depth that made him successful became the reason studios hesitated. Hollywood didn't want a fragile hero. Hollywood wanted a hero who was on time, steady, and immune to emotional turbulence. The 1990s marked a major shift in the industry. Studios were looking for rugged faces, reliable, hardened, safe choices who could shoulder responsibility without faltering. Michael Biehn, a man who acted from the heart more than from muscle, became an outlier in that era. Casting calls became fewer. Big projects disappeared. His name slid steadily downward on every shortlist. The most painful silence came from the person who once believed in him most, James Cameron. It wasn't betrayal. It was the reality of a director burdened with $100 million responsibilities. When Cameron prepared to make Avatar, many fans believed Michael would return. But that phone call never came. There was no single event that shattered his career. No dramatic moment where he was pushed out. There was only silence. A silence that stretched so long it became an answer. And for a man who had carried the fear of abandonment since childhood, silence was not just a career decline. It was the confirmation of his deepest insecurities. I'm not good enough. I don't deserve it. I've been replaced. Hollywood didn't slam the door shut. Hollywood simply stopped opening it. And Michael Biehn's quiet disappearance from major projects became one of the saddest, least spoken stories of that decade. A story Hollywood never mentions, but fans have never forgotten. When the Hollywood lights faded, what remained was not the peace people often imagine. For Michael Biehn, the first thing that hit him was emptiness. A cold, hollow silence wrapped around a man who once lived in the frantic rhythm of film sets, who was used to applause, who used to hide behind powerful characters. Now, there were no roles to disappear into, no characters to speak his emotions for him, and that was the terrifying part. The 2000s marked a difficult chapter of his life. Alcohol, once a way to soothe the pressure, began destroying his health and his relationships. It was no longer a lifeline. It became the weight dragging him down. Michael was forced to face himself, and for the first time in his life, he couldn't hide behind work. The broken marriages left deep wounds. Michael wasn't a bad person. He was simply too sensitive, too easily hurt, and too easily overwhelmed when emotions spilled beyond what he could control. He loved deeply, but loved with a soul that had never learned how to heal itself. The more he tried to hold on, the more he lost. And then fate struck him with a blow no role could have prepared him for. A stroke. No warning. No signs. Just one moment, and everything changed. Michael lost balance, lost coordination, and, more importantly, faced the truth that his body was no longer the safe place it once was. A man who once played elite soldiers now had to relearn the smallest movements. But in that moment of near darkness, a light appeared. From one single person, Jennifer Biehn, his third wife. Jennifer didn't love the legend Kyle Reese. She didn't love the strong, stoic Hicks. She loved Michael, the wounded, breakable man who needed to be understood. Jennifer became the most important anchor in his life, supporting him through therapy, guiding his recovery, and giving him a space where he didn't have to be strong. For the first time in decades, Michael could breathe without fear of being judged. Through that long healing journey, he discovered a truth. He didn't need Hollywood to exist. He didn't need studio approval. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. What he needed was peace. Michael began again from the smallest steps, making independent films, collaborating with his wife, choosing projects free from deadlines, pressure, or box office expectations. And in those choices, he found what fame had once stolen from him: the freedom of his own soul. The scars remain. But for the first time, they no longer frighten him. They have become proof of survival. Marks of a battle not every actor has the courage to face. Michael Biehn's return didn't arrive with flashing lights, press conferences, or explosive headlines. It began like a breath, a small, steady rhythm. After surviving pain, addiction, a stroke, and years of being forgotten by Hollywood, Michael stepped into a new chapter of his life, no longer chasing glory, but chasing peace. The first thing he did wasn't trying to make a comeback. He tried to heal, through therapy, through relearning patience, through accepting that he no longer had to be the unbreakable man he once played on screen. And then, Michael chose the gentlest path: independent films. Alongside his wife, Jennifer Biehn, he began acting in and producing small, low-budget projects rich in creative freedom. These weren't films designed to make waves. They were safe spaces, places where he could make art at his own pace, without pressure or judgment. In 2011, he directed and starred in The Victim. It wasn't a blockbuster, but it was an act of courage, a first step forward. Michael stood in front of the camera not to prove anything, but to affirm that he was still here, still able to create, still able to exist in a world that once swallowed him whole. Then something unexpected happened. Michael was cast in The Mandalorian. Not a major role, not a dramatic career resurrection. But the moment he appeared, sci-fi fans around the world were moved. Because to them, Michael Biehn had never vanished. He had simply been healing. The Mandalorian didn't restore him to the A-list, but it brought him something far more important: a quiet recognition that his value had never disappeared. It had only been silent for a long time. After that, Michael continued joining small projects like The Red and the Farm. Strange, sometimes odd stories, but perfectly fitting for an artist freed from the need to please Hollywood. He chose films that made him happy, films that let him breathe, films that allowed him to finally be himself after years of being who others expected him to be. Michael Biehn's rebirth didn't come from stepping back into the spotlight. It came from finding peace after the storm. And for a man who lived his whole life in fear and uncertainty, that peace may be worth far more than any fame he ever lost. Michael Biehn's legacy doesn't lie in the number of blockbusters he starred in. He didn't have long-running franchises, he didn't hold Oscar trophies, and he never received the massive publicity enjoyed by his contemporaries. And yet, the name Michael Biehn remains firmly etched in the memories of millions of fans, in a way that is deeper, quieter, and far more enduring. What made Michael an icon wasn't physical strength, but human fragility. In The Terminator, Kyle Reese wasn't just a soldier. He was a man carrying pain, loss, and a desperate, unconditional love for Sarah Connor. In Aliens, Hicks wasn't the loud, commanding hero. He was the silent pillar of strength amid chaos. And in The Abyss, Michael revealed the darkest corners of the human psyche, a soul pushed to the point of breaking. He made audiences believe in a character's fear, in his vulnerability, in the silent moments that spoke louder than action. In an era when action roles were often simple and one-dimensional, Michael brought a heavy psychological depth that made his characters painfully real. And that is why he is so beloved. Within the sci-fi community, Michael Biehn remains a legend. In forums, in analysis videos, in fan discussions, his name appears again and again, not as the star Hollywood forgot, but as a spiritual hero of an entire generation. The strange thing is, Hollywood may have moved on from him, but the fans never did. His influence even extends to younger actors. Many who pursue the action drama style see Michael as someone who paved the way, an action actor who didn't need to shout, didn't need oversized muscles, only needed a single gaze that held an entire world. He proved that vulnerability could be the most powerful weapon on screen. But perhaps the most beautiful part of Michael Biehn's legacy is this: he showed that you don't need to be a superstar to become a legend. You don't need everlasting fame to live forever in the hearts of viewers. All you need is one role that touches the soul. And Michael did that more than once. Kyle Reese, Corporal Hicks, and the many wounded, haunted men he played, they have all become irreplaceable pieces in the history of sci-fi cinema. Hollywood may have forgotten him once, but time did not. And the fans, the ones who still speak his name every day, certainly never will. When we look back at Michael Biehn's journey, we don't just see an actor who once reached the top and then disappeared. We see a man who fought battles the spotlight never illuminated. His performances live on not because of effects or spectacle, but because of the truth in his eyes. A truth shaped by wounds he carried his entire life. Michael's life reminds us that fame cannot heal every fracture. And sometimes, the greatest victory isn't returning to Hollywood. It's finding peace after years of chaos. He chose to slow down, to live honestly, to be himself. And that is the triumph of a man who learned to rise even after falling many times. Hollywood may forget quickly, but Kyle Reese, Corporal Hicks, and the wounded heroes he portrayed will stay in the hearts of audiences for a very long time. And you? What do you remember about Michael Biehn? Share your thoughts below. And if you want to continue exploring honest, emotional stories about artists Hollywood once left behind, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support is the reason we can keep telling the stories that were never told.